who knows who broke? Everyone has a theory.
I know.
Who broke it up?
John.
John did.
Yeah.
John, plain and simple. That single name is Paul McCartney's blunt response when he's asked directly who ended the Beatles. Not Yoko, not finances, not artistic tension. John Lennon. And Paul hasn't said this just once. He's repeated it publicly, clearly, and without wavering. Yet here's where things get complicated. Paul has also admitted that he once threw Ringo's Starr out of his house. He's confessed that he and John were firing shots at each other through songs. He's acknowledged being angry, withdrawn, and quietly boiling in the studio while Yoko sat on his amplifier. So if you assume the Beatles simply drifted apart, think again. Because what Paul McCartney has shared in recent interviews paints a story that's far messier, deeply human, and far more painful than the polished version we've heard for years. For half a century, the same question has echoed worldwide. What really caused the Beatles to break up? The theories are endless. Yoko caused it. Brian Epstein's death caused it. Paul was controlling. John became extreme. George felt sidelined. The business fell apart. Take your pick. But here's the overlooked truth. John Lennon privately told the other Beatles he was quitting in September 1969, 7 months before the public ever knew. Paul was the one who confirmed it publicly in April 1970 through a press release tied to his solo album, and history branded him the bad guy.
I just want to say these are papers I haven't even read. I apologize.
Gentlemen, the split was chaotic. What followed was even worse. John and Paul began attacking each other through music, real diss tracks written to sting. They went from hand-holding love songs to verbal punches set to melody. But lately, Paul has been opening up more than ever on Howard Stern, in BBC interviews, and in his book, The Lyrics. He's finally explaining what truly happened, and hearing it directly from Paul changes everything. Let's start with the bombshell he dropped on Howard Stern's show. The host asked the question people have been asking for 50 years. Who broke up the Beatles?
No, I don't think anyone tried to pin it on it. It just came out that way. That's a long story. But there was a meeting where John came in and said, hey guys, I'm leaving the group.
Right, he was with Yoko.
That detail matters because for decades, Paul took the heat. People believed he ruined the Beatles. Paul later told the BBC, I had to live with that perception. All I could say was no. Here's the twist. John's manager, Alan Klein, urged him to keep the breakup quiet so they could finalize a major business deal first. So John quit in September 1969, but it stayed secret. When Paul announced his solo album in April 1970, accidentally confirming the end, the blame landed squarely on him. John Lennon and Ringo Starr were just 29 when the Beatles ended. Paul and George were only 27. Let that sink in. They'd already conquered the world before turning 30. But even before John officially left, tension was building, much of it centered on Yoko Ono. On Howard Stern, Paul speaks candidly about how they really felt when she began attending recording sessions. Let's be honest, we didn't welcome Yoko in the studio.
Yeah, because it felt like a guys-only space.
Even our wives and girlfriends weren't really allowed in. They could stop by the control room briefly.
Right.
But sitting in the studio with us, that was a no. We were working. Instead of talking it out like adults, silence took over.
Did you ever tell John how you felt?
No. You didn't? No. Saying it outright would have been impossible. Paul recalls the exact moment things shifted. It was a shock of seeing Yoko sitting on one of the amps. Right. Like, excuse me, that's my amp. This wasn't divine drama, it was human. These weren't gods, they were young musicians in their 20s who'd been inseparable for a decade. After they stopped touring in 1966, that shared mission disappeared and their lives began moving in different directions. Passive aggression was inevitable when personal boundaries collapsed. Then came another blow. Brian Epstein, the manager who kept everything together, died of a drug overdose in August 1967. John later admitted, that's when I knew we were in trouble. I was scared. Without Epstein, there was no mediator, just 4 massive personalities dealing with business chaos, and John bringing his partner into the studio every day. But here's where Paul shows real perspective. Years later, he understands it. Looking back, we came full circle. When we ended, it was the right time.
You were young and needed independence. And John had found Yoko, his muse, who led him somewhere new. A more mature Paul hits differently. And if you want proof of how bitter things became, listen to this. It's 1970. The Beatles are essentially over, but nothing's official. Paul's solo album is ready. Then Ringo knocks on his door, carrying a letter from John, George, and himself.
You're about to release McCartney.
Yeah, the Beatles are done.
The band plans to release Let It Be.
This still blows my mind.
Yeah. Ringo shows up at your house
Yes.
with a letter from John, George, and Ringo saying you're not allowed to release your album at the same time as a Beatles record.
That's right.
And Ringo delivers it in person. Yeah, I know. I did that. What happened was you grabbed him and tossed him straight out of the damn house. Yes, that's true. I did it. Absolutely, I did. Well, you see how it goes. Honestly, I don't fault you at all. Picture this. Your closest friend of 10 years shows up as a go-between, asking you to delay your album so the others can release theirs first. That's wild. The breakup alone was already painful enough. On top of that, everything we'd earned, the money, the fame, felt like it was slipping away completely. Yeah, exactly. And suddenly there was someone ready to take control of it all, and it came frighteningly close. A huge power struggle erupted over who would control the Beatles' business affairs. John, George, and Ringo backed Alan Klein. Paul pushed for his father-in-law, Lee Eastman. In the end, Paul was left with no option but to sue the other three Beatles in December 1970 to legally dissolve the partnership. Think about that. Taking your own brothers to court. That's how extreme it became. But now, listen to how Paul looks back on it. Still, even after all that, we eventually pulled things back together again. Families do that sometimes. That line really lands. So here they are, split up, suing one another, and then they begin writing songs aimed directly at each other. The interviewer mentions too many people from Paul's Ram album and points out a telling lyric. You took your lucky break and broke it in two. Paul confirms the line was meant for John. It's actually my favorite song you ever wrote. That right there was your first mistake. You took your lucky break and broke it in two. Yes, that was about John. We were literally writing songs at each other. Right. It's like turning music into weapons. Paul released Too Many People in May 1971, including lines like Too Many People Preaching Practices, a clear dig at John and Yoko's activism. John fired back with How Do You Sleep, where he mocked Paul's music, sneered, the only thing you done was yesterday, and even fed into the Paul is dead rumor by singing, those freaks was right when they said you was dead. Paul later explains just how deeply that cut. Do you still feel hurt that you never got to fix things before that? Just a bit. Are you kidding me? When someone like John Lennon attacks your music, yeah, that stings badly. But one thing I always knew about John was that he often shot his mouth off without thinking. In his book, The Lyrics, Paul wrote, John was firing missiles at me with his songs, and a couple of them were pretty cruel. I don't know what he expected to gain other than punching me in the face. But here's what turns this story from tragic to healing. It didn't drag on, and thankfully we moved past it. I honestly feel lucky we did. Yeah, because if we hadn't, and then John was murdered, I don't know how I'd have survived that emotionally. By 1975, John and Paul had reconciled. They played music together in Los Angeles, and John later admitted How Do You Sleep might have gone too far. By 1976, they were spending time together in John's New York apartment, smoking weed and watching Saturday Night Live. Their friendship had found its way back. Then, 4 years later, John was killed. In another interview, Paul shares something quietly devastating. He's asked how often John crosses his mind. When people ask you about John Lennon, how often do you think about him? Pretty often, honestly. Yeah, very often. I still dream about him. Really? Would you share one of those dreams? No. All right. Okay, sure. The truth is, when you've shared a bond that deep for that long, it stays with you. I actually love it when people from your life revisit you in dreams. I have band dreams all the time. They're strange and vivid. I'm often with John, just chatting about doing something together, and then I go to grab my Hofner bass, and it's wrapped in sticky tape. That tiny detail, the sticky tape, is so oddly specific. Then Paul adds this. I guess that must feel a certain way. No, I understand that.
I'm not saying his words didn't hurt me, because they did, but knowing John, I understood he could say harsh things about anyone without truly meaning them. Then Paul shares the moment that likely spared him years of regret. When John died, one of the most generous things Yoko ever did was pull me aside and tell me, he really did love you. She was kind enough to give me that, and it meant everything. So the reality is, John once said the band ended because they were bored. By 27, they'd conquered the world, stopped touring, and they were just going through the motions. He compared it to a marriage that had simply run its course. Add Brian Epstein's death, disastrous business decisions, and their desires for lives beyond the band, and it was over. But this is what truly matters. They found peace. Before John died, they were friends again. They played together. They spent time together. They forgave one another. And when John was gone, Yoko gave Paul the one truth he needed to hear. He loved you. The Beatles ended, but John and Paul didn't. If stories like this move you, subscribe for more.